It's no secret that Harley Davidson sales are declining, but today we're going to look at why, as well as explore the growth of Indian motorcycles under the Polaris umbrella and identify if and when Indian sales may surpass Harley Davidson. Comment below if you think they will and when you think that'll happen, and watch to the end for my predictions. Harley-Davidson and Indian Motorcycle have been competing for sales for well over 100 years. From the start of Indian in 1901 and Harley in 1903, the American motorcycle wars have become infamous. With their technology, dealerships, racing, and production jockeying for superiority through the early 1900s, it seemed Harley had finally put the nail in the coffin of Indian after winning the majority of the Army's World War II contracts, giving them the capital to survive that tough war era, while Indian struggled to make ends meet. After the war, Indian made a series of poor decisions, ultimately ceasing production in 1953. Though a handful of companies used the Indian name through the second half of the 1900s, there was absolutely no threat to Harley-Davidson, who, though having some tough times of their own and changing ownership a couple of times, ended up dominating the American motorcycle market for many decades. Then in 2011, Minnesota-based Polaris Industries, a multi-billion-dollar powersports manufacturer that was ironically founded in 1954, the year after Indian went under, purchased the Indian name and prepared an entire new line of American cruisers released for the next model year, 2014. With roughly twice the annual revenue of Harley and almost 3 times the number of employees, Polaris is no small fish, a true potential threat to Harley, and had already dipped their toes into the cruiser market with their line of Victory motorcycles. While Victory was a great American-made alternative to Harley, it was a new startup. It was more cutting edge, and it lacked the heritage and name recognition required to really compete with Harley. So in 2017, just a few years into their production of Indian motorcycles, Polaris abandoned the Victory name to focus solely on Indian R&D, marketing, and production for street motorcycles. Rewinding just a bit, as I previously stated, Harley was absolutely dominant through the 1990s, after Willie G and other investors were able to buy the company back from AMF in 1981, and restructure the company, its goals, and its operating plan. Times were good in America, sales were great, and profits soared. By the mid-2000s, the American economy had softened. Harley stuffed their dealerships full of new inventory to hide a decline, but eventually it was evident that consumer bike purchases dropped, profits dropped, and so stock values dropped. In fact, in a span of just 2 years, Harley-Davidson's stock value dropped from over $50 per share in early 2007 to just $6 per share in early 2009. Not only impacted by the American recession, Harley also took a hit from the untimely acquisition of MV Agusta in 2008 and subsequent resale of it in 2009, which cost the motor company about $135 million. Within 5 years, Harley was able to get their stock value to recover back up over $57 per share in 2014, but it has declined ever since, with 2023 average value at $35 per share. While Polaris also saw declines during the recession from 2007 through 2009, Polaris identified ways to diversify, setting out on a series of acquisitions and expansions, driving their stock value from a 2009 low of around $6 per share up to a peak over $125 per share in 2014. In the 5 years prior to the recession, Polaris stock hovered in the $12 to $18 range, and 2023 average stock price was at $106. Let's start to transition this discussion from stock values to sales volume, which is really what this video is about. Harley-Davidson sales volume never recovered to much more than about half its volume recorded in 2006, which was the motor company's peak year for sales at 268,000 bikes. In the 5 years after the recession, their maximum annual volume reached was only 168,000 bikes, leading one to ask how their stock value could recover to higher than 2006 value if they now sold 100,000 less bikes. Much of the stock value increase has been attributed to buybacks, where the company itself buys stock back from shareholders to artificially increase the stock value by creating demand that isn't really there. And how could Harley buy all the stock required to increase share value by that much after a significant sales decline? Debt. Most corporations have debt, but there's good debt and there's bad debt. And Harley has squarely landed themselves on the bad end of the spectrum, showing debt figures worse than 92.9% of all companies in the vehicle and parts industry. This debt is considered bad because Harley's earnings are not sufficient to cover their debt, therefore making them at high risk for bankruptcy. Now, I don't think the Harley brand is going anywhere, but their books certainly don't look very strong at this point. Enough of the financials talk. Back to how many bikes are sold. As I stated, Harley saw a peak sales volume in the year 2006 at 268,000 bikes. Then the recession hit and sales dropped to 162,000 in 2009 and 143,000 in 2010. Sales to consumers were probably lower than that, but vehicle sales are counted when bikes sell from manufacturer to dealership. So many of those bikes were really just piling up in Harley dealer showrooms, not actually making it into people's garages. Post-recession, Harley-Davidson sales in the United States grew back to a peak of 168,000 in 2013 and have steadily declined since then. Timing that suspiciously coincides with the release of Indian motorcycles under Polaris. 2014 Harley-Davidson sales were 167,000, then 165 in 2015, 159 in 2016, 146 in 2017, 131 in 2018, and 124 in 2019. All right, you get the point. Then when COVID hit, Harley sold just 102,000 in 2020, likely due to initial supply chain or transportation issues. They did then have a small increase for a couple years through the high demand following COVID, and though Harley hasn't yet released end-of-year data for 2023, through Q3 they are down again and will likely end the year somewhere just over 100,000 bikes. While those numbers are declining, they're still massive numbers. And we know Indian was starting from 0 in 2013. So let's look at how they're doing. It's extremely hard to pull Indian-only sales data out of the Polaris reports, as they break up vehicle sales into off-road, on-road, and marine, but on-road includes both Slingshot and Indian, and through 2017 also included Victory. Slingshot sales are typically decreasing and Indian sales are typically increasing each year, but exact numbers are hidden well. Here's what I have been able to find. Again, we know 2013 was 0 since the first model year was 2014, though a few may have shipped before the end of 2013. One would expect a decent jump in the first year with an initial product offering that many people are excited to buy. By 2017, Indian sales had grown to over 30,000. 2019 was referred to as a record year, but like Harley, Indian suffered declines in 2020 due to supply chain issues related to COVID. 2021 ended at 36,600 and some, dropped again to just over 30,000 in 2022, then hit massive gains again in 2023 as production was finally firing on all cylinders. This is known because Polaris has advertised massive percentage increases in their quarterly reports. Just like Harley, 2023 end-of-year reports are not yet available, but let's estimate closer to 40,000 units for 2023. For the sake of this next graph, I'll ignore all data for both Harley and Polaris before 2013, as it seems irrelevant in the search for these results. Though recall that in the 8 years prior, Harley sales had already dropped by 40%. So here's how Harley Davidson and Indian sales look. Best we can tell, from 2013 through now, Harley with a definite continued downward trend, and Indian with the expected upward growth from a starting point of 0. Next, we need to briefly examine the intent and goals of each company moving forward. Polaris has made it clear that they intend to continue expanding their Indian product lineup, adding more dealerships and growing sales. Alternatively, Harley's CEO has said they prefer to become a premium boutique brand, decreasing sales volume, increasing average profit margin per bike, actively close manufacturing plants, and decrease the number of dealerships. It makes sense that each company's sales will eventually taper to hold a certain market share, then trend with overall industry growth, but we don't yet know what that point will be. So here are my predictions for future sales of each brand. I see 2 likely scenarios as they approach their future unknown new market shares. The first scenario indicated on this graph shows sales trends of each company continuing only slightly until they hold volumes of around 70,000 annual units for Harley and 50,000 for Indian. This will require an aggressive change by Harley Davidson in the next few years to quell their loss of sales and market share, instead seeking to retain market share by stopping the hemorrhage of previously loyal customers, abandoning the brand while simultaneously earning the business of new, younger riders. Alternatively, the second scenario shows sales trends of each company continuing for longer before market shares begin to stabilize, indicating that Indian will indeed surpass Harley-Davidson annual sales in the United States starting in the year 2029 and reaching a volume of 60,000 in the next 8 years. Let me know what you think will happen and why. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button if you made it all the way to the end of this video, and ride safe. Hopefully that came out all right.